I think it's fascinating that research into a local hotel can reveal so much social history. And looking back on life, we can see how we and things around us are governed by the changing world. Before I speak about the hotel, I'd just like to mention some brilliant sources of information and photographs that I've found during my research. My thanks go to Steve Glover and Michael Rogers for the information in their book, The Old Pubs of Deal and Warmer, the website Dover Kent Archives, which is a great source of the East Kent Mercury transcripts and photographs, the late brilliant historian David Collier, and the wonderfully resourceful Lee Jones, who supplied me with some great pictures, and of course the late great photographer Basil Kidd, whose pictures we'll see a little later by kind permission of the Deal Maritime and Local History Museum and Basil's family. The story of the Queen's Hotel, originally called the South Eastern Hotel, begins in a way on the 1st of July 1847, the day that the South Eastern Railway Company brought the newly invented railway to our sleepy town. It was quite an occasion the day Deal Station opened, and the ceremony was attended by no less than Charles Dickens himself. It was around 50 years later that the hotel was built, but it was a change that the railway brought with it that led to its construction. And it's surprising just how much of a wide reach our station had. And it began life as a terminus of a branch line from Minster Junction and Sandwich, which meant the services to London ran north from the station via Canterbury. And this was the terminus building here. And the missing link to the south was delayed due to company rivalry. But finally, they joined forces, the South Eastern Railway and the London, Chatham and Dover Railway. And they built the line south of Deal to Dover, so it was joined up, and that line opened on the 15th of June 1881. Now the railway was joined up and far-reaching, it was expected that the amount of visitors to the town would increase greatly, and these new holidaymakers coming down for the sea air and the fashionable sea bathing would need somewhere to stay. So the site that was chosen for this new state-of-the-art hotel was the land of the old naval yard known as Victoria Town. The South Eastern Railway Company commissioned the London architect James Brooks and a local developer James Wise to build a modern hotel fit for the discerning railway traveller. James Brooks had become so well known and applauded for his church designs, and we can see these here. And I just thought I'd put these together for you. These are in Shoreditch, Hoxton and Haggerston in London. And I think we can actually see, with show some more pictures of the Queen's in a minute, but we can see, although these are obviously church buildings, there are quite a lot of similarities. And I think it was what got mine was the circles at the top. When we look at the Queen's in a minute, you actually be able to see that on the gable ends. And I just thought you can really see his influence, plus the red brick as well. But because he was so good at designing churches, he rarely built anything that wasn't a church. And so that's why it's quite an important building. And it was one of the only exceptions was the hotel in Deal. And it's also a good time to mention that at this time, when the hotel was under development and was to be called the South Eastern Hotel, obviously after the railway, that just up the road between Stanley Road and Sons Road, there was already a hotel named the Queen's Family Hotel, which was built in the late 1870s, and its frontage is still there now as the Prince of Wales Terrace. It was described as a commodious and splendid hotel. And obviously when I was doing my research, it's quite easy that these two hotels can be confused as the time has gone on. But there we are, you can sort of see the similarities, as I said about the gable ends with the circles and the circle up there. But the South Eastern Hotel was constructed of red brick with facings of Ancaster stone from Lincolnshire, which was used to build the Norwich Cathedral, among other great buildings. It opened in 1898, and it's interesting to note that it was built initially without the glazed conservatory and the ornate metal and glass canopy on the front, and it sort of became famous in the town for that canopy. And there's a pen and ink picture here of the hotel, and this is by A.J. Sylvester, and I found it on the Dover Kent Archives site. And you can see that they're not there then, So I read, and I think it was David Collier, the historian, said it could have been that the Deal northeasterly winds resulted in the front extensions being needed, because when they blow it's very cold, so it's right on the sea, so who knows. But we've just got some, we've got some internal shots there. I mean, obviously it was state-of-the-art at the time. Now it obviously looks a bit dated, but the Newley Hotel, it boasted 62 bedrooms, 36 of which had private baths, electric lighting and a lift to the upper floors, oak doors, dark walnut furniture, mosaic floors, sumptuous fireplaces with overmantels and stone pillars and arches, and also, worryingly nowadays, a fireproof ornamental asbestos ceiling, described as a fine specimen of decorative art. So the hotel became popular and prospered. I've just got a shot, that's the hallway, and I can remember, I did have to go in there once, but I remember the chandelier at the top. And you can see people walking along the prom there. And during its early life, it prospered, and it had several different managers, and one of them from the Charing Cross Hotel in London. So I think it was quite a prestigious hotel, and it was important to the railway, and it was important to the town. And from this period, one of the most famous pictures of the hotel is this one. And here we have Tank 4613, which was presented to Deal and Warmer in recognition of the fundraising undertaken by the local communities during the First World War. And this tank arrived at Deal railway station, and it was driven through the streets and then sighted outside the South Eastern Hotel with great ceremony in August 1919. When I heard that, when I read that, I just thought, I can't imagine that turning up at Deal station now. Just imagine the chaos, can't you? And it would, it would certainly be on the evening news anyway. So I believe it stood there until 1936. And then obviously we had the Second World War. And during the Second World War, the hotel was kept open for its permanent residents, and the bar remained open for the townspeople. And after the war, the hotel reopened under the new name of the Queen's. And there it is, the Queen's Hotel. And during this next period, there were big plans to develop the car park and to a bowling club, but nothing came of this. And the semi-basement was named the Dive Bar, and it was popular with locals and the Royal Marines stationed at the barracks. And apparently there was a resident pianist who recalled impromptu jamming sessions with the musicians. And I think my dad went there a few times as well, but I didn't think my mum knew, so I'm not sure what's going on there, but that's another story. The hotel was also popular for local functions, such as here. And they've got a couple of Basil Kidd pictures here. This one is actually Basil's in this one, second from the right, the bottom there, that's Basil, and that's he was a Rotary Club member. And then we've got a dinner dance taking place in there with the local staff dances. Looking at Basil's pictures, it's just amazing how many different businesses there were in the town, and they just had hundreds of staff. I mean, obviously we've just got the do-it-yourself tills now and things, but there was just so many staff, and they had big dances and everything. So, but anyway, back to the Queen's Hotel, and it continued to be a popular venue and for local visitors to Deal until the mid-1970s, when it became a victim to the changing ideals of the time. Package holidays became available to the masses, and the idea of laying on a sun-kissed beach in Spain, said albeit like a sardine, was often more appealing than the dodgy English coastal weather that Deal had to offer. And the great British public left in droves, turning their back on the hotel. Also, the owners stated that they couldn't comply with the latest fire regulations. And I can imagine times were changing. There had been a nasty fire in Dover, very bad fire where a fireman had been killed, and I think people's awareness was being brought to things like that, and I just think it must have been a task just looking at it. So sadly, in 1977, the Queen's Hotel closed its doors for the last time. And here, unfortunately, is the beginning of the end. And it seems that the hotel was never far from the pages of the East Kent Mercury. Through the next few years, it was up for sale several times. It had numerous owners, and each one had a new idea for its future. Neglect began to set in. It was subject to vandalism, and the lead from the roof was stolen, and most of the windows were broken. And I know people just used to go in there. I remember standing outside looking at the dive bar. I didn't actually go in, but I know two of my friends did, and they actually spent the day in there. And, you know, this is obviously before mobile phones and things. Nobody would have known they was in there, but they just, like, mooched around for the day and ate their sandwiches and things. But, you know, it was a lot going on in there. And now it was open to the elements, and the devastating rot soon set in. And I remember driving past with Mum as a child and seeing the posh people in the beautifully lit front conservatories, and now, just a few years on, it was a really sad sight to see. And a quotation from the president of the Chamber of Trade in the East Kent Mercury from August 1979, which is now 40 years ago, believe it or not, says the Queens must be brought back to productive use as soon as possible, and certainly before the Open Golf Championships coming to Sandwich in 1981. It's a depressing sight for both residents and visitors, and a bad advertisement for Deal. I'm pleased now it's again on the market, and hopefully it will return to its former glory. Now, reading, I've done a lot of reading on this, but there isn't time to go through it here, but I've tried to condense it down as best I can. But the last few years of the hotel's existence, there was a few owners it passed between. It was up for sale, it wasn't. But lots of the two owners teamed up with a local developer and applied firstly for planning permission to redevelop the hotel into flats and other amenities. There was a few other things they wanted to do. And then permission to demolish and rebuild was applied for, as it was said that the hotel was now beyond repair. The years were moving by, the water was pouring in, and the hotel was already old, and time was definitely taking its toll. I found a quote, and it said, "It looks as bad as bomb damage. There's no alternative but for demolition." And that was a quote in the Mercury. Add to the mix a recession and high interest rates, and the future was really looking grim for our hotel. And having lived through that time, I think Deal was a totally different place than it is now. It's prospering now, and it's lovely to see. But I think I can also say there were some dark times in the 80s. But it did go up for sale, but reserve prices weren't being met, and it was getting worse, and the owners insisted demolition was the only answer. But then on the 2nd of January 1981, the Mercury reported, "Whitehall thwarts plans for the Queens." So, despite being turned down for listing 10 years before, a petition by some of the locals wanting to save the building had now been successful, and it was listed as a building of archaeological and historical interest. And this goes back to the famous architect James Brooks, and the fact that it was so unusual for him to design a non-religious building that made the hotel unique, and this is why they wanted to preserve it. But still, the petitions to demolish continued, and one that was backed by 600 local signatures. And I think because the hotel was starting to fall to pieces, I think people really did feel it was a bad advertisement. Something needed to happen. But the opposition was determined, and the wrangling continued until the early hours of Thursday, the 9th of April, 1981. And this happened. And the Mercury says, and I quote, "A mystery fire destroyed the Queen's Hotel." That screamed the headline. I've got some photographs here. These are Basil Kidd's photographs, and I'll just flick through them, but it was quite shocking. Great pictures. I think nowadays Basil probably wouldn't have been allowed where he was allowed in those days. It does look a bit dodgy. But I actually remember that day walking down the town, and I walked back, and then I saw it going on. I was just walking down the town to meet my friends, and I was just so shocked and saddened to see this. But I was almost that shocked that I remember seeing, because as the day went on, they were still trying to put it out. And it's just brilliant, isn't it? It's just, and you can see there on the gable end as well, the circle that I meant, looking like the other churches, but it's just so sad to see it like that. I don't want to be that fireman. I've said before that I'm not really keen on heights, and that is just beyond me. definitely. And that's, I think that just says it all, that one, doesn't it? But then inside, it says firefighters from all over Kent were called in to help tackle the blaze, and it was discovered later was caused by vandalism. What I'm reading here is what I'm reading from the Mercury. I'm not going to put, this is just what I'm reading from the Mercury. And it had been started by some papers being set alight at the bottom of the lift shaft, which obviously, it did a good job, didn't it? Because that would have been acted like a chimney, and unfortunately we lost the middle of the hotel. The current owner, by now the local developer who had been campaigning for demolition, had only just flown to Spain for 2 weeks. Yeah, I don't understand this. When the hotel caught fire. And he was quoted as saying, "We understand it may have been started deliberately, and we wish to express our condemnation in the strongest terms at such a wanton and purposeless act of vandalism." So anyway, yeah. So these pictures show the aftermath of the fire. And I think that's a dive bar, I don't know if Dad knows. And this is what I mean about where Basil got that day. I mean, it's just amazing. But yeah. And you can see it was mainly, obviously the roof was just gone. But this is just my favourite picture. It's just so iconic, that picture. I love it. And they'd obviously been working hard all night, and I believe it actually caught fire again a couple of days later, and they had to go back. So, so there was an emergency meeting held a few days later, and some of the parts of the structure, such as the ornate gable ends that I mentioned, were deemed too dangerous to leave standing. And these were removed immediately, and the hotel was soon shored up with scaffolding. I'm not sure if I have got... Yeah, we've got the demolition here. By now it was a really sorry sight, and it was never going to end well for this beautiful building. But it was still listed, and again it was down to the environment, the Department of Environment, to approve demolition. Of course, by now circumstances were completely different. The hotel was gutted inside, roofless, and being held up by scaffolding. So in August 1982, the owner-developer got his way, and the building was demolished. So we've got one there that Basil took, and another one. It's just so sad, isn't it, to see such a beautiful building ending its life like that. And there you go. So, it's one of my pictures. I took this picture slightly later in the 1980s, when the new flats were being built. And I remember feeling sad that such an iconic building from my childhood had gone. And I returned to create the bottom one in 2017. And I thought, just as I was putting them together, it's interesting to know how the shelving of the beach has changed as well. Where it's been done, you can really see the difference in that, can't you? Because when I went scuttling off with my camera to retake it, I thought this is just completely different. And then Wednesday, so here we are. And I took this picture on Wednesday morning, and if I was a visitor to Dill, I personally don't think I would look at this block of flats and think it was a dreadful eyesore. But in that situation, I wouldn't know the beautiful building that had been sacrificed for it. But me personally, when I'm rushing around as usual, dashing past, I hardly give any of it a thought. But whenever I slow down and maybe out for a walk or visiting Tudor Castle, I always look up at this newish building with a lot of sadness for times gone by. Oh, that's it. Thank you for listening.